So welcome everyone. Welcome to the AIPTV show, with the True Dialogue show here on AIPTV. I'm your host, Esa Abduraheem. I'm joined today by my special guest, Miss Èzili Dantò. Èzili Dantò is a human rights and international law attorney and award-winning playwright, performance poet, and cultural activist. She was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and raised in the United States. She is a Haiti scholar and runs the ZiliD Network, the Free Haiti Movement, the Haitian Lawyers Leadership Network, ZiliD Designs, and ZiliD Clean Water Renewable Power and Skills Transfer for Haiti. Èzili is the author of 10 books and 2 book series. She regularly conducts Haiti teach-ins and on the non-colonial narrative on Haiti, centering on Haiti's wealth, natural resources, revolutionary culture, Vodun spirituality, and her expression of this through the Vodun jazzoetry performance productions. Èzili was featured as a Haiti scholar and historian in the documentary 1804, The Hidden History of Haiti. In 2018, Èzili was honored at the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame for her lifetime of justice and cultural advocacy works. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Honor and respect to you and all your listeners.
Yes, thank you so much indeed. And so I want to get started. And, forgive me since, French is not a native language of mine. Forgive me, audience, for any mispronunciations. But the first question I wanted to start off with Haiti, because I wanted to focus on the history and what led up to the War of Independence in Haiti. And so could you give us a bit of background on the prehistory of Haiti, the Taino people who lived there, and the arrival of the Europeans, and the history and the background in regards to that?
Certainly. So all the school books tells us 1492. Christopher Columbus landed in the Americas, and the first place that he put a fort in is Haiti. He landed in the north of Haiti. At that time, the island Haiti, it had 3 different names, but the one that was the most popular name, the most known name, is Haiti, Haiti, and it means sacred homeland. What most folks don't know about that is that it is both a, let's say, I'm going to use the word Amerindian name, and it means something in Africa, because Blacks are original to planet Earth, and we were in the Americas long before the Mongolians got there and meshed with the native folks, and you have what you might see as the what they call the Indians, right? But those words are colonized words. So for Haiti, it was divided into 5 sections, and I'm going to use the word Taino, but I want you to understand, and I always teach this, that they were Black people in Haiti. If you read the book, The Annals of Haiti, I normally put out a reference on it. You will see there were the Aguinis, Aguayos, there was the Black Caracals. The Black Caracals are important because we are able to find what they look like by going to, let's say, Belize. There's a pyramid there. It's called Caracal Pyramid. And Dr. David Imhotep, who's done some research after they came before Columbus, Van Sertima's book, updates Van Sertima's book to tell you that if you go to Belize and you go into the pyramids and you see the reliefs, the pictures, you will see photos of Black people. And there is some connection to Haitian culture in that, because this thing called a klaxon looks like a trumpet. And in those pictures that you see in the Caracal carol called Pyramid, they're playing it. If you go to New Orleans, for instance, you will see that too. If you go to Haiti doing carnival, you see it too. So our culture was not destroyed. The Tainos, what they call the Tainos, including the Blacks, were not totally destroyed. They meshed with the Africans who would come into Haiti later on in 1503. For 1492, Christopher Columbus comes in with his 3 ships. He runs aground up in north. He lands up there in Cap Haitien, what they call Cap Haitien, Cape Haitian, and is rescued by Guanacaric. And the others that were in that island that are very notable, all other 4 will fight at some point against the invaders. But when they first came, we are a people of hospitality. We do not think people are going to put trinkets and shine above the value of a human being. We had not understood that. So that's what happened. He came in and he was received by Guanacaric. In the middle of Haiti, there was a Kaonabo. So there were 5 caciques. And to the south, there was Bohikio. Kaonabo was married to a woman who is famous. Her name is Ana Kaona. When her husband went up to push back the invaders, because Christopher Columbus left around Christmas time. He came December 5th, 1492, around Christmas time. And when he left 39 I guess conquistadors. They were Spanish. He left them there, and they started raping the people, forcing them to do hard labor, and beating them, asking them for gold because they would be wearing it. They didn't think anything of it, or they had spears with tips of gold. And so there was like, where did you get that? And they pointed to the East, Africa, to say, this is, we exchange trade with people across the water. So, and Columbus wrote that in his book, and there's a lot of information that Columbus wrote in his biography and writings, and Bartholomew de la Casa also, about the Blacks who were in Haiti. I emphasize it only because no one really emphasizes it. So there were 5 caciques or chiefs, and once Kaonabo went up to the north to push the invaders back because they were attacking the people, he was captured 2 years later, put on a ship supposedly to go to Queen Elizabeth. Was Ferdinand. Even though Columbus was Italian, he was working for the Spanish, right? He was a mercenary for the Spanish, not for like the nation state of Italy at that time. And so when Kaonabo was captured, his wife took up arms. And this is something that Haitian women have been doing since Ana Kaona. I specialize in talking about the Haitian women of the Haitian Revolution because you will not find them in your book. And I will be telling you some about them as we talk. So 5 caciques, Kaonabo is killed. His wife takes up arms. She ends up essentially pushing out the invaders, but then they ask for a truce, and when she goes, they capture her and give her a choice between being a sex slave or dying, and she chose to die. This will continually be the choices that Black women and Taino women are given from 1492 to now. You either right now in the Dominican Republic, which is, when Columbus got to Haiti, working for the Spanish, he named the island Hispaniola, Little Spain. Later on, after the Haitian Revolution and the European tribes got together, we will then have the Spanish come back. And today for Haiti, they're on our borders. And so they always like to use their colonial name for Haiti. They'll say Hispaniola. You'll see when there's a hurricane, they'll say Hispaniola. But always remember that Haiti is the place. Not only do you have the first destruction of this white supremacist group of invaders, but you also have it's the place where the resistance started, and the resistance has not stopped since Kaunabo, since Anacarona. And so they refused to work. They would run up into the mountains, right? By the time there's a priest named Bartholomew de la Casa, he starts seeing how the killing of these folks. At that time, it was 1492. It was the fall of Grenada. So he proposes to the Pope to send the Africans that were being deported out of Grenada because of the fall of the Moors in that space, the Arab Moors in that space. So the first boatload of Africans that came to Haiti were from the Iberian Peninsula. They were being deported. Of course, you know, the deportation is something that started there and it continues today. When we try to go out, we are being deported. Haiti is sort of like a penal colony because we are surrounded by nation states that are owned by these people that we beat during the Haitian Revolution. So that's the story of the Taínos. They were there. They fought back. And then in 1503, that first boatload started coming, and the Africans became the labor force to build the Americas for the European tribes, whether it was the Spanish, the English, the French, the Dutch. That's what we were. And they were taking us from the west coast of Africa all the way down and across. But remember, there was, at that time in 1492, the Arabs had already invaded Africa. We had different waves of European or Eurasian tribes that came into Africa, where the corpus of our nations was, right? So 332 was the first, and then you have the Romans, and then the Arabs pushed them out. So 1492 is that time where the Iberian Peninsula is southern France, Italy, Spain, and they've gathered their power, and now they're coming to West Africa to take enslaved Blacks to come and build their nations. And so that's what happened. And so with that first boatload, they continue to have their slavery. And 100 years later, around, I think it was 1697. So slavery goes on. You have the Africans on both sides of the island being brought in, one by the Spanish, mostly by the Spanish. And then when the French started raiding, like the European tribes are always fighting each other. So they raided Haiti to the point where they had a stronghold over one of our islands called Île de la Torture, Turtle Island. Very important, because you guys know what the Amerindians say about the Americas, right? Turtle Island, they called it.
Right, yeah, they call it Turtle Island.
Yes. So there is an island called Tortuga. It's if you watch the movie of Pirates of the Caribbean, that's where they are.
Okay.
But they won't tell you that that's Haiti, right? But
Right.
that's where the European tribes were fighting each other. And eventually the Spanish gave up the half of the, not half of the island, but a part of the island, third of the island, to the French, right?
Okay. Okay. And that's a
And then
great lead
that's,
up. Oh,
yes.
sorry. Sorry, I was just saying that's a great lead up. That's excellent. And actually, we covered Columbus in a previous video. I interviewed Solomon Kamazon at Your World News. Shout out to Solomon. Go check him out at Your World News. And so we did that interview about Columbus, covering that history. Um, and you're right, in terms of the abuses against the Taino people, the original people, as you're explaining, I would also tell people to check out the Ivan Van Sertima book, as you mentioned. They came before Columbus, to assess those arguments from Ivan Van Sertima, who's a great scholar, top rate scholar. He makes some great arguments about the arrival of Black people, African, phenotypically African looking people being in the Americas prior to 1492, and especially the Olmec statues in Central America definitely offer some proof to that. So I would tell the audience definitely to check out that book. That was a great recommendation. And also, just wanted to make a recommendation for the book from C.L.R. James, a scholar, English scholar, Trinidadian scholar who wrote about the Haitian Revolution. His book is called The Black Jacobins. So I think you set that up perfectly in terms of, the prehistory of Haiti, before Columbus, a little bit after Columbus, and now we're getting into slavery, and you set us up perfectly in terms of the conflict between the Spanish, who first arrived on the island, and eventually the French, who fought with them, and eventually won a part of the island, which, if forgive me for pronouncing this wrong, Saint Domingue, I believe, is the part of the island that they eventually named it. So if you could describe the background of slavery on the island, at least what I got from CLR James, and I just want to open up with a little bit of a background that I gained from CLR James. I think is good for the audience to hear this. Is you have a slave trade. I want people to kind of picture this, that spanned from Senegal to Mali. And if we're looking at Western Africa, Senegal to Mali, down to Nigeria, if we're looking at West Africa, all the way down to Angola and the Congo, even around to East Africa, we're talking Zanzibar, and also Mozambique, and far into the interior. And if we're talking West Africa, some of the main routes to go inland would be the Senegal River, the Niger River. If you look up maps, and I think I'm going to put up graphics of these maps so you guys can see and get a visual. They go far into the interior. So basically, the situation that was occurring there is you had Europeans who set tribesmen against each other with enticements of guns and other monetary awards for delivering Africans, delivering Africans to them. And the propagandists at that time, the European propagandists, would say that the African was better in America than in war-torn Africa. But it was in fact the Europeans who were starting the conflict, to begin with. So it was just, they were just creating propaganda. And so you had missions that went deep into the interior, people shackled with, stones attached to them so they can't run away. Some people marched hundreds of miles to the coast. Once they arrive at the coast, they're in stinky, filthy holding pens. They said many, especially Europeans, would faint within minutes in being in these places. So they're held there, and then they're put in tight holding pens on ships, and and they're on this ship for about a month. And you can imagine many of these people on the ship for the first time, crossing the ocean, dealing with ocean sickness, tight quarters, no medical attention, very little food. About 20% of people died regularly on these journeys. So you can see the horror and the barbarity of this type of journey. And so once they arrive to a place like Saint Domingue, um, they were treated like animals. Basically, they were worked from daybreak until sundown, 16 to 18-hour days, typically harvesting sugarcane, harvesting and planting sugarcane. They were patrolled by overseers who would whip anyone taking a rest. If you were seen taking a rest, you would be whipped immediately. This is how terrible the treatment was. They were treated like animals. And of course, there was the contrast. I was reading, CLR James did cover, there was a contrast between the treatment of the house slaves versus the field slaves, similar to what we see in America. There were, privileges, I guess, for the servants who were closer to the master. So that was apparent in Haiti. And as you mentioned, there were the formation of maroon communities also. So there were those who fought against the Haitian masters. There were those who, fled into the hills and, created long-lasting maroon communities. And, in contrast to that, on the white, those who made up the white people of Haiti at that time, you had members of the lower French aristocracy, French debtors, adventure seekers, Europeans from other places such as, Britain, Spain, Germany, even Americans there also. And there was a distinction between the lower whites and the big whites, the grands and the petit blanc. But all of them had authority over the Africans. So it was a very clear segregated color line. And you also had a class of mulattoes as well. So I guess the question was setting all that up and describing all that, at least what I got from CLR James, could you describe slavery in Haiti during the colonial period and also describe, the history of the maroon communities and the leaders, the early leaders that formed at that time that were resisting against slavery?
Sure. Some of the things that people don't cover, that we cover at the Free Haiti movement, is that our history did not start with his story. Our history did not start with slavery. Our history did not, it doesn't mesh into what you will find in his archives, because the establishment changes their archive, and they have a bunch of folks like the so-called Enlightenment folks and so on, and those that write about them even up to today, that will give you the colonial narrative about Haiti. So before we just move to what you're just talking about, which is the beginning of African Holocaust in the Americas, which started in Haiti, I want folks, those who know what I do all the time, there is a place in Haiti where there's a rock. It's called Camp Coq, COQ. It's a monument, and it's carbon dated 35 to 100 million years ago. So what's in Haiti actually changes all that we know about his story. And it has writings that certain geologists have said compares to the ancient writings that you will find in different places in Africa, for instance, right? Kemet. And so there were sentient beings on this planet that is not connected at all to the Abrahamic religion that tells you that, they started their journey here 6,000 years ago. We're talking about there is writing that goes back 35 to 100 million years ago. So wow. Imagine all of that. And I just gave you the name of the rock. Of course, the United States has been trying to take it out for a long time, so that they can create their own narratives. There's also another thing that's really important to know before we get to slavery about this landmass. Haiti is over 1 billion years old. That landmass that apparently, let's use their word, when there was only one landmass on the planet, and then they say that an asteroid hit it, or meteor, comet, whatever, however you want to talk about that rock from space, that came like a nuclear bomb that was 66 million years ago. And the remains of that is called iridium. and it's found in various places, but they say geologists, Daniel Mathurin, for those who would like to go and read his work, says that that is the purest form of that iridium is in Haiti. I have a slide that's on my Free Haiti Movement album page where I show from using US military maps that when that asteroid landed, let's say to break the continents, right? It landed specifically in two places on the planet, right where Haiti is and around where South Africa is. And underneath Haiti and all those islands, there's a big crater there. So what was there that was being destroyed? That's another issue, and I go into that for other people, but I'm just giving you that sideline because it's something that is not in the books. And for those who are adventurers who want to go beyond Ivan Van Sertima, who want to go, I always, of course, go beyond CLR James because his stuff is seen through the visor of communism, Marxism, and his belief that Jean-Jacques Dessalines wasn't Haiti's founding father, Tousen Louverture was. We don't do that at Free Haiti Movement. So you will hear me talk about, so like I said, Camp Cock, 35 to 100 million years ago. Haiti's over 1 billion years old. Like when, and there are pyramids underneath Haiti. And I always point to folks, if you want to see what it looks like, since we're under occupation, and the United States wants the world to know we have nothing that they want. Like, they're not going to tell you about Camp Cock. They're not going to tell you that we sit on 4 tectonic plates like the Middle East. And those tectonic plates is what grinds to give you this oil that Haiti has. So they won't tell you what they're doing in Haiti, what they're taking out, and why the geography of Haiti is so important to them in terms of the Windward Passage and the shipping lines and so on. I'm telling you those things. So, as you say, in 1503, the Holocaust for Africans started with respect to the Europeans going from all of West Africa, all through Angola and to the east, as you say, Zanzibar. Most of when the Haitian Revolution started would be after 300 years of enslavement, right? So it started 1503, but it was 300 years of the most barbaric treatment that a human has ever felt. This is what Haiti destroyed. This is why they hate us so much, because we did what Spartacus, even though today, if you go to the Louvre, there's a nice statue of Spartacus, but the European tribes killed him and his entire group of enslaved people in the rebellion. So the Roman Empire destroyed Spartacus, but Spartacus before Haiti, that was like the biggest slave rebellion in recorded history. And that was about 1900 years before the Africans did what they did in Africa. No enslaved people have ever done what the Haitian did, right? No enslaved people. Spartacus, who the European elevates right now, like I said, the French, who were killing us and enslaving us. And as you say, so the Haitian Revolution started in 1791. It is going to be over 13 years later. We're going to declare our independence on November 29th, 1803. So 1503 to 1803, 300 years. At that point in time, what did it look like for my ancestors in Haiti? So Haiti was the most profitable colony in the Americas. When I say it was the most profitable colony in the Americas, I want you to remember let's start with 1791 when the revolution started, and what did it look like, right? So if I say 1791, just go a couple of years before 1789, that's the French Revolution, right? And then go a couple of years before that, 1776, that's the American Revolution, right? So we're in the age of supposedly the revolutions, right?
Yeah.
And so those revolutions are against monarchy, right? So the two European revolutions are against monarchy. Okay. They have no intention of giving the ordinary people rights. Just want to replace the monarchs, right? So you have the 1789 revolution, and then in France, and they are slaughtering each other. And Africans had been planning their revolution since they got on the boat, right? It might have taken us 300 years, but since they got on the boat, right? Everywhere you look, Africans fought back.
Yes.
But when the European is writing his story, of course, he tells you that, we liked our enslavement and so on. We were passive people and we were children and so on. What did they do? How did it look like? 1791. As you said, there were in that time, right before the Haitian Revolution, about 500,000 people on the island. 500,000 Africans on the island. Amongst that, you had they say about 60,000 or so free Blacks. And a great portion of that free Blacks were property created by the white rapist planter. And they were called mulatto. Haitians still call them mulatto, even though today people are calling them biracial and mixed. Because in Haiti, that gave them certain rights that elevated them above the African and the purebred African. And to this day, they want those rights. And so they call themselves mulattoes.
Yes.
But in America, that would be America didn't have that sort of vernacular.
Right.
So today, sometimes I read these books and they're talking about biracial and mixed. And I'm like, in Haiti, we had about 450,000 Africans. Their lifespan was between 3 to 6 years. Haiti was a place you went to die.
Wow.
When there was a revolution, for instance, in 30 or 50 years before with Nanny, the Maroon and Jamaica, right? If they didn't kill you outright because you revolted, the punishment would be to sell you to Haiti, where your lifespan is minimal, right? And one of those people that was sold to Haiti is Boukman, and he was the one that began the first leader of the Haitian Revolution in 1790. So Boukman from Jamaica, coming from there, right? Another guy that is one of the most renowned generals of the Haitian Revolution came from Grenada, right? So the European tribes, like I said, would constantly bring folks from one of their enslaved spaces to the other, depending on, because we were just merchandise that they would trade. It didn't matter whether you had a child, any relationship in Grenada. He was young. Henri Kristòf, the greatest general below Jean-Jacques Dessalines, was purchased from the person that sold him by a man who would treat him like a son. When you read Haitian history, it's as if, it's the European visor. So you don't know what the relationships were between the people that fought the revolution. And let me tell you what it was. So Henri Kristòf, for instance, was purchased by a free Black man.
Mm.
That free Black man treated him like a son, and he would become the greatest builder, bar none, in the Caribbean. His
Mm.
citadel is in UNESCO as a marvel of the world. His palace rivaled that of Versailles. This is a guy who was enslaved. But Henri Kristòf, to go back a little bit, 1779, during the war between the American War, the French were on the side of the Americans, and so they sent about 700 soldiers to go to Savannah, Georgia, to fight the British. This is before American independence, and so that was Haitien, and Henri Kristòf was a drummer boy. He was a young boy. So he started looking at military when he was very, very young. Okay. The other important thing about the Haitian Revolution to understand is that the Africans who fought, they were military soldiers in Africa, not just the women, not just the men, but the women, right? So Dahomians played a very big role in the Haitian Revolution. The 300 years, imagine 300 years, okay, of the most horrible life that, you only had 3 to 6 years from the time you got there. So if you made it to old age, there was something special about you, right? And there's a group of women who did make it to old age, and they were no longer able to provide property for the European. They went into the Catholic Church. They're called the Dédés, and they helped plan the Haitian Revolution. And what's so revolutionary about these women that you will never hear, of course, the Catholics will never let you know, is that the cry of the Haitian Revolution was coupe tête, boule caille, cut their heads off and burn down the plantation. It's not like the revolutionaries today, or folks who say they're revolutionaries today, who are trying to somehow maintain the edifices of profit over people. Haitians were not trying to do that. So essentially, you have the Dahomians, you have tribes. The Haitian Revolution, the legend is about 21 African tribes got together at Bois-Caïman with Boukman. And they said that the white man's God wants him to commit crimes. Our God wants us to do good. And then they started the revolution. And within a month, they had essentially burnt out all the major plantations in the north. The Haitian Revolution really happened mostly in the north. In the south of Haiti, you had a lot of the free Blacks there, less kind of big plantation, more coffee plantations. And that's where you're going to find Pétion and Boyer and Rigaud, right? These are children of the Frenchmen. And this is what they do, right? They will send their children to schools, and then their role is to come back and be part of the maréchaussée, which is the military that would go after the Maroons.
The Maroons,
I want you to visually think that the.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so the Maroons there are some, like for instance, the Igbos would not be enslaved. A lot of African tribes were fighting the European tribes in West Africa, right? Part of it, around maybe 1679, you have a woman who was part of the Adogis, part of the Minos. She was a warrior. Her name is Toya, Victoria Mantu. When she got to Haiti, an enslaved person, this was a very skilled military woman. And she looked around and she saw how we were beaten down. And so she was, she kept trying to find folks together. And then what they decided, a group of women and men, decided that they were going to create the Revolutionaries. Kristòf was purchased by a free black man. That free black man had a daughter, Marie-Louise. She would become the first queen of Haiti when they killed Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the founder of Haiti, right?
Mm-hmm.
He also adopted a woman that was sold. Her name is Cyrille Fatima, and her African mother. Cyrille Fatima is a mulatto. Her father, her French father, sold her into Haiti when she was a young kid, right? And this black man, right, married the mother and adopted Cyrille Fatima. Cyrille Fatima would become famous as one of the high priestesses of the Vodun ceremony that began the Haitian Revolution. And then you have Desalin. Tantoya took this young man back into slavery and taught him how to be a general, taught him all that she knew from Africa, taught all that she knew about who and what we are. That's why nobody will tell you this. I'm sure it may not be in the C.L.R. James book, but he named his indigenous army the armies of the Incas, because he knew that we were powerful people, and he was raised to be a warrior. And what is a warrior? A warrior is not just a fighter for liberty, but also a healer. And you have to know the terrain. So she taught him how to wherever you are, what the terrain is. If you wanted herbs, what can it do? And so they used the terrain. So a warrior was not just a person of skill, martial skills, which she taught Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Okay, and so she came from Dahomey, right? Tousen Louverture's father was a prince in Alada, part of Dahomey, Benin, right? So they connected, right? So you have Toya, who served the king of Alada in the Benin in Dahomey, right? She comes to Haiti and meets the other Dahomians, including Toussaint Louverture's father, who she probably was serving the king. He was a prince. His name is Hippolyte. So the Dahomian connection and military skills for the Haitian Revolution is deep, right? I'll give you another thing. When Kristòf, so the revolution happened, it started with the Bwakayima call, because the Africans came from all different tribes, and they tried to get them to, they would not put let's say an Akan with an Akan. They would separate them. But when we got to Haiti, the Maroon communities would help us get together with those that were planning the revolution. The Dahomians were planning the revolutions, the Igbos, the Oyos. So all the Africans, like you say, who were fighting each other in order to save themselves, right? Because the way the European template works is that they want you to shed your blood, right? So they will train you or give you a reward to go get enslaved people for them, right? That's what's happening today, right? The integrated Negroes, they are there to maintain the establishment and the profit over people paradigm, right? Back then, what they did with Queen Nanny, when Cujo was fighting, once, they made a treaty with Cujo and Queen Nanny said no, but Cujo said yes. What did they say? This is really important, because when Bookman comes to IT, he's already knows that this is going to be a war of we either live free or we're going to die, because you have the Dahomian warriors who know what happened to them in Dahomey, right? They know that every treaty the white man made for them, he never honored, right? So you're going to come to a point in IT where that's going to become a a fork in the road for the three biggest generals, Henri
Hmm.
Kristòf, Desalin, and Tousen Louverture. Tousen
Yes.
Louverture was more Eurocentric than these other two.
Yes.
Because Grantoya took Desalin from a young child and showed him hand-to-hand combat, showed him how, she also explained to him that at no point do you surrender, because what they're going to do is give you like a general, make you, give you your freedom, but then you have to go and catch all the runaway slaves for them. And in 1800s, after the revolution starts 1791, there's the revolution of France going on, but the
Yes.
Africans never wanted to work ever again for
Yes.
plantation owners,
And
right?
I'm sorry, I don't want to, sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to focus a little bit and go back a little bit, because you mentioned the French Revolution was happening 1789, prior to the full kickoff of, the Haitian Revolution, the Haitian War for Independence. Um, so, one of the things I was reading about is that in France, of course, there's a shift from its interest in the colonies. There's more of a focus internally within France because, they're busy with their own internal revolution. They just killed Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette. There's the whole instability, that's going on with France with the First Republic. I'm forgetting the name of the scholar. I'm blanking on his name, but there was one who was kind of leading the way and leading a lot of guillotine um, uh,
Robespierre.
murders. Yeah, Robespierre, who was like leading that era of horror. So
Yeah, they're
basically,
very, very, very brutal people.
yeah,
But
yeah,
but
and so
they won't talk about what they did in the Haitian in the French Revolution. But when you read these books, they say Desalines is a racial murderer because he killed 3,000 African Frenchmen after we won our independence. But if you read any of their wars, if you even go back to, let's say, Spartacus, right? When when the armies of the Romans had crushed the Spartacus rebellion, there were about 120,000. They call it the Servile War, the war, right? They murdered every single one of them, right? But only
yes,
Haitians are called cursed for murdering enslavers who would breed them, who would put them in holes and leave their heads out and put molasses and have ants eat them alive, who would rape to make all those mulattoes, who would then make those mulattoes come back and fight against their own people.
yes,
So all that was going on. But when the
yes,
Haitian Revolution started, like I told you, this place was a place where they brought you to die, but Haiti made the most money. I think it was like 60% of the world's sugar, 40% of the coffee, I could have inverted those numbers, was from Haiti. There were 13 colonies in the Americas.
yes.
Haiti alone was more profitable to the French than all the 13 colonies were to England when it had them.
Wow, wow, and
That's how important. That's how important it was, right? It
yes,
made France, right? So
yes,
when revolution happened, they had no intention of leaving that cash cow.
yes, yeah,
But
exactly.
since these guys were always fighting each other, when the revolution happened over there, they were just getting rid of their monarchs and guillotining
Yeah,
every monarch, right? But
yeah,
in Haiti, a lot of the lords, a lot of the aristocracy were big planters. So when they saw the revolution happening, these big planters, they're like, hell with France. I'm going to
yeah,
go with England.
yeah, exactly.
England to this day has monarchy.
Yeah,
I'm
and
going to go with Spanish, right?
yeah,
So
exactly.
there was a division in the island because the aristocracy who saw the killing of the aristocracy in France by this, third assembly, they they didn't have any loyalty to like nation state. They were like,
Yeah.
they asked England to come to Haiti,
Yeah,
right?
and I
Take
wanted to
over
point
the
out
island so they could maintain slavery and
exactly,
maintain their rule. And England did
exactly,
come.
and
So
I
during the
wanted
Haitian
to
Revolution, we fought 3 European nations. We fought the French, the Spanish, and the British, and we
right,
beat all three.
and I wanted to just to go back to that a little bit. When the French Revolution happened, like you mentioned, a lot of the local planters had no interest of actually freeing the slaves. And one thing I was, came across in my research was that really they wanted to create a ruling class that was a mix of whites, mulattoes, and free blacks that would control uh, the enslaved blacks and,
Not
basically keep the system.
necessarily. That
Mm,
no.
okay.
I'll tell you why. The planter mindset, the aristocracy, right?
Mm,
That was the Grand Blanc. That's what they call them, right? So if they were aristocracy or if they had a lot of money, they were called Grand Blanc, and
mm,
like the big whites, right? And then the regular Joe Schmo who was a worker, like the Grand Blanc doesn't work. He just sits
mhm,
around raping people and running around killing folks in order to steal their stuff.
yeah.
But there were working class whites that were adventurers that might have ended up in Haiti, or some of them were rapists that loved to go into the ships where they would have free access to the enslaved women and do whatever they want. To this day, that paradigm goes on with the NGOs, the so-called charitable industrial complex, right? Because we are a vulnerable people. So all kinds of pedophiles go into charity in order to do that to us and to our children. I know because I put a few in jail.
Mm,
So yes, the Grand Blanc, the aristocracy, the mindset, it's been replaced today by Syrian Lebanese, who are now the Grand Blanc in Haiti. They're the
mm,
billionaires of the Caribbean. They care nothing about the 13 million Haitians who are in that space. They have privatized all the ports. They control the trade, just like back in the day. And they work for the motherland, the United States. Okay. And so that paradigm hasn't changed. So you have the Haitian Revolution starts, you have the aristocracy in France fighting each other. So the ones that are in, they were afraid. The aristocracy was afraid when the United States, became free, right?
mhm,
Not a, yeah. So what they wanted to do was, they were like, well, we'll be like the United States, like the French planters who were in Haiti, right? They were looking for their separation from France, like the United States separated from Britain, but maintaining slavery, okay? And before the Haitian Revolution started, doing the revolution of in France, there were mulattoes like a guy named Auger Vincent, OGE Vincent, right? He was eventually hung in Cap Haitien, but he was a mulatto who saw that the lower classes of people in the non-property classes of people in France were revolting against the aristocracy for their conditions, and they were saying, we want some égalité, fraternité, right, and brotherhood, right? So when Vincent saw that, he was like, well, I'm a free Black man, but the Code Noir puts me in such a bad position. I'm almost equal to the African enslaved, because every time they wanted to change something, the mulattoes, even though they were the closest, the petit blanc, the workers, they hated the mulattoes, right? Because the mulattoes, might have wealthy fathers who would send them for an education. They had, they were working class, so they hated the mulattoes, right? So they were always making laws to put the mulattoes in their place. And one of those laws was like, you can't wear the clothes of a Frenchman, for example, right? And that humiliated people like Auger. So he asked that assembly to give them these rights. And the assembly actually gave the mulattoes certain rights. So when they try to apply those rights in Haiti, the planters said, "Hail to the no. What is it? You think, we brought you here, created you so you could be Frenchmen? Hail to the no," right? So there was a conflict between the mulattoes and the Grand Blanc. And then there was a conflict between the Grand Blanc and the Petit Whites, okay, who was jealous of these people who had an education, had businesses, but when the Africans decided to go to war and kill all of them, unless they were about freedom, there were many mulattoes who worked with Jean-Jacques Dessalines, like his secretaries, for example, right? Volontaires. There were just many, right? In the Haitian Revolution, you have a great deal of mulatto women who fought, like Marie-Jeanne, and who fought in the revolution. Why? Because the mulatto women were just, any free man could do whatever they wanted, and they had really no rights, even though they were free, unless their father protected them. And a lot of times they were absentee landlords. They were not even there to protect them, right? So they fought to protect themselves. So a lot of mulattoes fought to protect themselves. But okay, so from 1791 to about 1800, Toussaint Louverture rises to become the greatest general, and he leads strategically the Africans to victory. By 1801, he had essentially maneuvered himself to the point where he got rid of all the French commissionaries from France, and he says, "I am Governor General of this island. This will be a Black rule French colony." And by that time, he has fought the British. He even got the Americans at some point to help him fight the mulattoes in the South. Okay. And so he did all of that because he was a very astute individual. He came from a royal line in Africa. His father was a prince. He would have been a prince. His father could have been a king if he wasn't enslaved and brought there. So the Africans respected him because of his line. And he was a great general, but he maneuvered a lot. He thought that he could tell Napoleon, when Napoleon came into power in 1800s, that I will be first of the Blacks and you be first of the whites, but Napoleon wasn't having it.
Yes.
So
and I want to pause right there a little bit.
Before he became, there was a war between the mulattoes and the Africans. It was called the War of the South. And that was
and I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off because I want to get into that, especially with the war with mulattoes. But first, I want to focus on the leaders. That you mentioned Tousen, and I really want to focus on this because our audience is largely African American, and at least my initial impression is that scholars in America tend to, especially English-speaking scholars, they tend to focus on Tousen. I was reading an article on historychannel.com about the Haitian Revolution, and they mentioned only Tousen as the primary leader of the Haitian Revolution, which of course he was, as you mentioned, he was an astute leader. He was a great general, certainly was, was the primary, or was a great initial leader. But there were other initial leaders, such as Papillon, Georges Biassou. There was also Desalin, as you mentioned, who was a lieutenant to at first he was a lieutenant to Papillon, but then became a lieutenant to Tousen, and of course was the first leader of Free Haiti. You also have, as you mentioned earlier, Henri Kristòf. You have Paul Louverture, the brother of Toussaint, and you also have Moise. Moise is another famous leader during that time of Haitian independence. So could you describe, these various leaders, and also, you mentioned that difference, that Toussaint, he promoted the idea of free Haiti that was basically a Black colony of France, still a partner of France. And we discussed earlier the difference or the contrast with Desalin. So could you describe that a little bit more, and also those early Haitian leaders during the War of Independence?
Okay. So the first leader is Boukman. I talked about him. He's famous for the Boukman's prayer, which it's a voodoo ceremony on 14 August, where he says the white man's God want him to commit crime. Our God wants us to do good. He would lead a group of enslavers to capture Cap-Haïtien. And he was eventually caught and died in battle. And then you have, who else was with him at that meeting but Biassou, Papillon, Jean-Noël Boulet. Those were others that were with, who would then take the leadership once Boukman died, right? Once he was dead, the revolution continued. And then you had, like I said, Biassou. So how did they fight back? So you have the agents of France coming to Haiti, and their major concern is to keep the island a French colony. When they see that the noblemen, the large planters, are going to either Spain or England in order to protect their property and their civil superiority from the mulattoes who were given these rights by the French Assembly. They killed those mulattoes like Vincent. And then, like I said, the Africans had already been, they had no choice. They died or they fought off the white man. And so once Boukman dies, you have Jean Biassou. And then that's when you start seeing Toussaint Louverture. He was a medical, he started as a medical person inside of the camp of Biassou. Then he became his secretary. And then what happened was the Spanish, when they saw the Africans fighting the French, of course, they always hated the French because the French took the other half of the island. They saw that as an opportunity to have the Africans fight on their behalf and then take over from the Africans and put them back into slavery. Well, Toussaint understood that. Biassou didn't really understand that. So Biassou, who was the leader at that point in time, stayed with the Spanish. So in the beginning of the revolution, the African warriors were provided with support by Spain on the other half of the island, okay? Not for the purpose of because they wanted them to be free, because it gave them an opportunity to try to push France off of the island. And then the planters went to England. So we fought the Spanish and beat them. right? The warriors led by Toussaint Louverture, including Henri Kristòf, including Clervaux, including Biassou and Journeau, right? They beat the French using the help of the Spanish. And then the French, seeing that the Spanish is about to take over the island with the Africans, declared the Africans free. Okay, so like 1793. When they declared that, there was another maneuver against, not because they wanted our freedom, but because they didn't want the island to go to Spain. So that's very complicated, but the point is that this is when Toussaint Louverture rises, because Toussaint Louverture was very francophone, right? He liked his, the French. So he believed that, the French just declared freedom for everybody. So he was like, okay, he took his army and he fought the Spanish and the English.
Yeah.
Okay. There 50,000 English soldiers are dead because of the work of the Black generals and Toussaint. And once Toussaint becomes powerful, now the agents of France are trying to bring him back. Now they got the island, right? They've taken the entire island now from Spanish. Biassou leaves for Cuba, right? He leaves the revolution, leaves for Cuba, right? Because he represented the Spanish, okay? But Toussaint's warriors beat the Spanish, and they turned around and fought the folks that the planters were going to, the English army, and we beat them too. Okay, now Toussaint is powerful. His big generals, greatest generals, Henri Kristòf and Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and his adopted nephew Moïse. Okay, Moïse is like second in command. He's done a lot in the north. Okay, Toussaint makes a fatal mistake. Maybe it's because he comes from a royal line, I don't know, but what he says is he negotiates a deal to say to the French, you can come back, the ones that left Haiti because of the revolution, and I will make the Haitians go back into the plantations to work for wages. Okay, so he's like forcing them to work for the murderers that they just had gotten rid of, because he wanted to build up the economy of Haiti.
Right.
Well, that was not going to work. Neither the Maroons, neither the peasants ever wanted to go back to large plantations. That became the downfall of Toussaint Louverture, because he would try to have his generals, including Kristòf and Desalin, try to force the people back into the plantation to work for the very people that they who were murderers and rapists. And so that's kind of what happened in Haiti. So how did they, when the French, when they realized how powerful Toussaint was, they went to the south, to Pétion and Boyer, and try to essentially, and Rigaud, try to say to them, divide and conquer.
Right.
So there was a war between.
Yes, and I want to get into the war between the Mulattos and the Africans, because I believe that's where you're going into next, and I think that's fascinating what you set up, and it's really interesting, especially the changing alliances of Toussaint. Like you mentioned, at first they were fighting on the side of the Spanish, and also they had British support. But eventually he changed sides once the French, especially going through their own revolution, and you had some people who were backing, the abolition of slavery. and like you said, there was really ulterior motive behind it. We just don't want to lose the entire colony. We still want to maintain some control,
Still
so
goes
we
on
can
right
create.
now, right? Think
Yes.
about Venezuela right now, because I like to bring people up to kind of see what's happening right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just under Trump, the United States was trying to destroy Maduro because
Yes.
Maduro has great cachet, the greatest cachet of oil reserve, and the American companies want it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
under Trump, he was a villain, and they just named Maduro as the duly legitimate leader of Venezuela, right? But
Yes.
then there's a
Yeah.
war that breaks out in Ukraine. The United States needs oil, and under Biden, they've kind of disavowed Guaido, and now they
Mm.
went with a delegation to Venezuela to work out a deal to get their oil.
Yeah.
That just shows you this is the way they think. It's not about anything out but their economic and domination interests.
Mm-hmm.
This is why when I go to schools and they want to tell me that the French and the abolitionists uh, had anything to do, let's say, with the Haitian Revolution, they did not at all, right? The Haitians and the Africans had been fighting for their freedom since they got on the hull of those ships, right? We have
Mm.
Macandal, 1758, burned
Mm.
to death by the French, right? We have
Oh.
his crew. It's still in Haiti in 1791,
Mm.
planning a revolution, right? And then
Wow.
you have but we don't learn the story of these Africans,
Mm-hmm.
of the
Mm-hmm.
Maroons, of Glen Brigitte, for instance, right?
Yes.
So I'm sorry, I don't know what the specifics that you asked me about.
No, because that's exactly perfect, and that kind of leads me that leads me into my next question. You mentioned the war, the divide and conquer between the mulattoes and the Africans, and um, so like you mentioned, after the war for independence starts, they go to the south, and you have figures like Alexander Pétion, a quadroon, basically a quarter African. For those who don't know, he was a mixed race person, and you have other leaders of the mulatto people, so to speak.
Boyer, the two big ones, the
Yeah,
two top ones, right? Rigaud, Boyer, and Pétion.
yeah,
They
exactly.
fight. So at
Hmm.
that time, Rigaud was they all were French generals. Okay. They all fought against these generals, right? These mulattoes. They fought with Toussaint against the Spanish and against the British.
Mm.
But when they looked and they saw that this black man was going to be their leader, the French pushed that divide and conquer, and now Rigaud is going against Toussaint Louverture.
Mm.
So
Mm.
Toussaint sends his black generals down to the south to beat Pétion and Boyer.
Mm.
Okay. And then Pétion and Boyer, unfortunately, they didn't kill him. They took a boat and went to France.
And
So
actually, a
they left
question.
the enemy behind, right?
Yeah.
That enemy would return with the Napoleonic expedition.
And a question I wanted to ask following up to that, with that conflict between the mulattoes and Africans, one thing I came across in my research with CLR James is that he mentions a mulatto, Raymond. Raymond, who was a well-known mulatto general at that time, was sent to take control of Santo Domingo. And like you mentioned, the entire island at one point of Hispaniola was under the control of the Haitian government. So with Raymond, and the mulat, he's like leader of the mulattoes going to send Santo Domingo, and we see today, the juxtaposition with Dominican Republic being, largely, mostly mixed people versus Haiti, and even I've heard, personally from, people from Haiti or people from Dominican Republic, there's still um, kind of there's a conflict between Haitian people and the people of the Dominican Republic. So I wonder, does that go back to that original conflict between the Africans and mulattoes? Are those mulattoes that were once in Haiti, or a part of that group in Hispaniola or Haiti or Saint Domingue, are they now represented in the people of Dominican Republic versus the, I guess, Black African people of Haiti today?
I think it goes further back than that, and I think it lies more with the colorism, of course, is an important tool against the African people. But the Treaty of Basel, BASE, is the treaty where the Spanish gave up the island of Haiti. And in that treaty, 94 or 95, 1794 to 1795. But so that's really, you have the French calling one side Saint Domingue, and then the Spanish calling it Santo Domingo, right? But Santo Domingo and Saint Domingue fall because of the Haitian Revolution, right? Because the Spanish tried to take over the entire island from the French, and they lost because of the African warriors. Mm-hmm. They've never forgiven us for that. Okay. Also, the Spanish has never forgiven us for the Dominicans, right? Coming from the Inquisition, coming from that space where Africa occupied Spain for about 700 years. Mm-hmm. So they think about it as like the Black hordes. They gotta get rid. They have that fear. But yes, to go chronologically, the story of Dominican Republic doesn't really come into being until like 1842. So we're still, Haiti hasn't won its independence. We have Tousen, who is now Governor General because he's beat the Spanish and the British, essentially under the French flag. And the French hypocritically gave freedom. Now they want to take it back. Mm. So they try to use the mulattoes to fight Tousen. Mm-hmm. Tousen crushes the mulattoes with his Black generals, okay? And the mulattoes who fought in the Haitian Revolution, the lovers of liberty that has no color. And so now Tousen is trying to reorganize the nation. He realizes that he needs trade. He needs resources. He needs to rebuild. So his idea of rebuilding is not the people's idea of rebuilding, right? Mm-hmm. So you have that clash, and that's still going on, right? His idea is to use the labor of the people to serve the consumer interest of the motherland.
Yes, right? And I want to,
what economy is today, right? Yes. So Toussaint Louverture's paradigm is the paradigm. They killed him for it, the way they killed Martin Luther King, right? But when they see Malcolm X, that's like they can't deal with that at all. That's Desalin.
Yes,
they're not integration, right?
And I want to dive more into that, especially so talking about Toussaint. You were mentioning, he wanted to create that partnership with France in service to, the motherland, the French colony, or, the motherland of France, so to speak. And, one of the things, and I wanted to just put this viewpoint out there because the viewpoint exists, and, it's great for at least the audience to explore. And so this was at least how CLR James described the move by Toussaint, so to speak. With the idea of restoring property and restoring rights to the Europeans, he kind of created an analogy, with Toussaint to the Bolshevik Revolution that happened in Russia, and where, Lenin, who was leading that initial revolution, had incorporated, officers, czarist officers from the former Russian military, czarist scientists, various different people who supported the czar previously, who were in, specialized, I guess, fields, or, they had specialty, special skills, whether they were businessmen, whether they were generals, or so on. He co-opted, some of their skills, or, he co-opted some of these people to utilize their skills. And yeah, he would give them good salaries and things like this. But he said the difference between Lenin and the Bolsheviks and Toussaint and the French, the white French, was that in the case of Lenin, he actually explained this to the people. He explained his entire plan. Like, yes, we have to co-opt them. We have to co-opt their skills because they previously had the skills. They previously ran the economy. They know how to do it. So we need to keep some of these people on board until we can, basically replace them and bring our skills up to, the necessary level. But in the case of Toussaint, according to CLR James, he didn't explain this. And, the masses of African Haitians, Black Haitians, saw this as kind of a spite, or a move against their interests. And so that was the explanation by CLR James, but I want you to, just describe that more, that difference of, or that position of Toussaint and that legacy, and also the position of Desalin, and, the legacy that has on Haiti today.
Yeah, I don't think it's that constricted. I don't think that Toussaint looked upon the planters as skilled. I think the Black folks that were in Africa were more skilled than the planters were. But the planters had power. That power is backed up by military. They had the boats, the ships, the trading lines. And I guess, if you want to call that a skill. But what I think the difference is that Desalines did the same thing, actually. He kept, when he killed the planters that were left after the war, he kept the craftsmen, right? So I guess that might fall into what you're talking about. Desalines did keep some of the, white French craftsmen, but he did not keep the plantation system going. Toussaint wanted to keep the plantations going, and he wanted to keep Blacks as workers, right? And Blacks wanted to be free and entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. If he had provided them with that opportunity, I think he might not have, they might have revolted when the French kidnapped Toussaint, right? Because the French came in 18. So Toussaint is Governor General. He's written a very Eurocentric constitution, 1801. Just check it out. And he has all the classes that the people were fighting all over the world, but Haitians were not going to have it, not after 300 years of enslavement. So that's why Toussaint Louverture, when he was kidnapped, I don't know what would have happened, if he would have had a chance to, like you said, explain to the people that, I think the people understood what he was trying to do. He was trying to be of value, or make Haiti of value to the French economy again, so that he would maintain his leadership there. But the people weren't going to have it, because many, half the population had died fighting the British and the Spanish. Now they're free, and they don't want to now work for the French. They know now they're going to have to fight the French. But Toussaint thought he could finesse that. So the French came to reinstate slavery under the Leclerc expedition. They had no desire of working with Toussaint Louverture in any manner. But Toussaint Louverture had forgotten what he had learned. he figured, you know, I had all this success. They're going to treat me like a general. Well, they treated him like a general when they needed him to fight the Spanish, but now they have the entire island. They just want to get rid of every soldier, African soldier, who ever wore an epaulette, a French uniform. That's what the Leclerc expedition came to do, period. And they were so certain they were going to do it that Leclerc brought his little whoring wife, Pauline, who was Napoleon's sister, right? And in that boat, in that armada, it was at that time the greatest armada, the greatest military force ever assembled. They had parades before they left France because these soldiers were veteran soldiers who had beaten most of Europe and just came out of Egypt. So for them, we were little less, you know, than livestock. They never thought that we could beat them. So they came with this armada. And in that armada was Pauline Leclerc, right? Or Pauline Bonaparte, right? She came with all her dresses and all her smile to commit genocide, just like the US ambassadors are doing today, right? She came from one of those islands, Martinique, and you know, the idea of Black people being free, and that wasn't going to work for this white woman. Okay, but she could use Boyer was her lover, but Boyer, because like I said, she was a whore. Boyer was her lover, and her husband, Boyer, was Desalin, Leclerc's secretary. She was having fun, right? She was having fun. That, you know, that's what the monarchs do. It didn't mean anything to her, right? But it definitely meant something to Rochambeau. Rochambeau came from an aristocratic line, and he was watching the aristocrats lose their power to a Black man. Rochambeau was underneath the general below Leclerc. They came to Toussaint Louverture. Desalin told Toussaint Louverture, don't listen to anything the white man says, but Toussaint Louverture figured he's going to talk to Leclerc. And when he went to the powwow, he was kidnapped and brought to the Jura Mountains, where he later died, right? So he dies in July 7th, and Desalin takes over as general. And when Desalin takes over as general, he has to face this big army. And he ends up beating the armies of Napoleon. So the Africans, under the leadership of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, trained by Dahomean and Congolese warriors, beat this big army. And when they do, the Europeans are shocked, right? The British are shocked. The Americans are shocked. Everybody's shocked because they all have slavery. They all have colony. They all have their economy based on slavery. And here is this happening. And so that's what happened in 1804, January. Jean-Jacques Dessalines and the Black generals win at a battle called Vertières. And they went against Rochambeau, because Leclerc dies of yellow fever. Okay. And then Rochambeau, his second in command, becomes, and Rochambeau was a terror. He's, like I said, he was going to do genocide. They had flesh-eating black people, flesh-eating dogs. Like, they fed them black people. And they you know, Hitler is credited with being the first person to gas people, right, to death. Well, Rochambeau did that, and Leclerc did that. They would take the prisoners and they would put them in the hull of ships, and they would put sulfur to kill them.
Wow.
They would drown them. They did. That's why. So the war started in 1791. Why were they still French people in Haiti in 1804 when we won? And January 1st, and I ask all your listeners who want to contrast what some of these European writers are saying about Desalin and the French that he killed. 14-year war. We're fighting the French, then the Spanish and British, and then the French again. Okay. So we had to fight 4 or 5 times before we won our independence. Why are there still French people in Haiti in 1804? Because they still want to bring us back into slavery. Dessalines understood that. Okay. So he let 7,000 soldiers go back home with Rochambeau. My question is, why didn't they all go? And on January 1st, 1804, he warns them all. You do not belong here. I know that I want, like, the academics, they're always lifting up Tousen Louverture. The reason they always lift up Tousen Louverture because he was dead. Right? They lift up Martin Luther King too after they kill him. Right? But they'll never lift up Malcolm X.
Right.
But Martin, so they lift up Tousen Louverture, but they had killed him. They're lifting up Spartacus because they killed him.
Yes.
You understand? Yes. So Desalin, though, killed them. That's the difference. Desalin, in his January 1st, 1804 Constitution, he says, Declaration of Independence, he says, I have avenged America. So let's go back to the Taínos. He didn't just avenge the Africans. He says, I have avenged America. That's why they hate Desalin. Imagine that narrative going out to the Africans, Americans enslaved in the South, elsewhere, or in Jamaica. I have avenged America. Now, in his Declaration of Independence, he says, listen, we can't celebrate yet. The French are still in our streets. We can't celebrate until they're all gone. Why were they there 2 months later? Well, when he found them there, he killed them all. If he had not, they would have taken down Haiti already.
Yes.
And Castro learned his lesson, because although Desalines got rid of the French, he did not get rid of the Mulattos, and they would come back and kill him. Castro saw that. And when Castro took his independence and he had studied the Haitian Revolution, when he got there, he not only got rid of the white planter mindset or the white colonists, he got rid of all the elites. They're all Republicans now in Miami.
Yes, yeah, that's a great point, and that's really excellent. And I think it's great to go through that contrast. And I never really realized that it was the mulattoes who were behind the execution of Desalines. And also it's important to point out that it's interesting how, and not to take away from Toussaint Louverture, and he was a great leader, a great general and everything, but we know very little about Desalines in the English-speaking world, particularly the United States of America, particularly among the African people living in America, who descendants of
Exactly.
slaves.
And this is what we say, because at Free Haiti Movement, our job is to lift up the women of the Haitian Revolution and the children of the Haitian Revolution, because they fought in family. A family went to war. That's the difference between what people are taught today about revolution. A family went to war. The women, the children, and the men. Each of those women had a male counterpart in war, at war. right? So Sunny
Yes.
Belair, when he was caught, she was caught. Her husband went to get her. He was the general. And they took him. They all
Mm.
had Marie-Jeanne, La Martinière. So a family went to war.
Yes.
Uh,
And
so we
and
can't
I think
forget,
that's yes. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. So no, you go ahead. You were saying?
Well, I just wanted to say, I think it's really great that I guess the thought I
So we
was
were talking about Desalin, right? I
exactly
suggest if you want to know anything about Desalin, you won't read it in the European tribes books.
right, exactly,
Okay, they have at least 20 different uh biography of Toussaint Louverture. Okay,
yes, yes,
and
and
their
I think it's
general,
interesting.
their
Yeah.
sort of general theme is that the Africans fought for their liberty, but then they became tyrants.
Mm-hmm.
That's their theme
Yes,
altogether with the Haitian
yes,
Revolution. So any book you
yes,
read, that's what they're gonna leave you with,
yes. And
right? That the
I think it's interesting that we're left with, Toussaint Louverture as the primary, I guess, leader of the Haitian Revolution, especially in the American or the English speaking context. And like you mentioned, Toussaint, his position, and not to take away from him, but ultimately his position was we have to make an alliance with the French and continue a relationship going forward and reinstill the old system of uh, the Black African Haitians working for the white planters. Albeit, yeah,
right,
it may be for a
right.
wage,
And
but
what
you
what
still
is
have to
it
work
that
for
the
them.
Haitians are
So,
fighting
you
for?
know,
What do we fight
yes,
for at Free Haiti?
yes,
Okay, so there were generals that fought for what we fight for today. And Toussaint
mm,
Louverture actually killed that general. His name was Moise,
Moise, yes, yeah,
right?
yeah,
Moise refused to push the African former enslaved back into working,
mhm,
right? And when they had the opportunity, they killed 300 white folks.
wow,
And because it was done under Moise's area, Toussaint went in order to please the French. He killed Moise.
yes, yes, and it's interesting. We
Okay,
know more about Toussaint, and we don't know as much about Desalin. We don't know as much about Moise, and we don't
or
get these.
Moise. What was
Yeah.
Moise fighting for? This is what they were fighting for. I always say it. Konbit, Lakou, Vif, Jarden, right? So what do we fight for today? We fight, and this is the template, right? We fight for work for the African is a communal thing. It's a cooperative economics. Everybody gets together in these lacous, and these lacous are farms where families live together. They call it the yard in Jamaica, but they're communal properties. So my Lakou, where I come from, right? If I should go back to Haiti, because of who my ancestors were, they all buried in that space. I am allowed a piece of land where I can work.
Mhm.
And this is where my grandfather and great-great-grandfather are buried. And that's my right to have that piece of space because they fought for me to have that piece of space.
Mm.
Lakou. Lakou, you got to remember 300 years of slavery, 300 years where women would lose their children. They could take them anywhere they wanted after you have the child. So the first priority of African women was to live in family in Lakou.
Mm.
The second priority, so Lakous, we have them in Haiti, right? They say there's about 172,000 Lakous. They're farm holdings where there's houses and most of the people are related.
Mhm.
Okay. And they work together in the fields. During slavery, there was like 3 different types of work shifts. But after those work shifts were over, even the children worked, right? And then you had
Mm.
each of the plantation at some point had like a little hospital for injured and hurt enslaved people. And it was those women that I tell you that were called the dedes who were the hospitaliers. They were the healers, right? And they're the ones that had the ability to move around in that system of that slavetocracy system, because they were supposed to be healing the property, almost like you're healing a horse, right? So you were able to move around to the hospitals to help keep those properties for the planters. Imagine it is them that helped plan the Haitian Revolution. With who else? This is really important for African revolutionaries, the overseers. The overseers who were forced to beat the enslaved were the ones that began the Haitian Revolution. Nobody emphasizes that. Bookman was an overseer. Biassou was an overseer. Papillon, overseers. They got together because in order to have a revolution, you have to have a little bit of movement, a little bit of independence. You have to eat every day. If you don't eat every day, that's all you're going to be thinking about. You don't have the luxury of thinking about revolution.
Yes.
Do you understand? The Haitian Revolution was started by overseers and men and women who were free, and men and women who had skills. Okay, I say that for those integrated Negroes who are freer, and have skills. They don't teach you that because I'm not writing the books. They're writing the books. Okay, so imagine that. They're not going to let that out. Overseers.
That's
started
amazing.
the Haitian Revolution. Remember,
and that's amazing you say that. And that's amazing you make that point. I just wanted to go off that point because the Black Panther Party said something very similar back in the 1960s, that you had to have a cooperation between the brothers on the block, those brothers that are living that hard lifestyle in the ghettos and so on, being locked up and so on. You have to have an alliance between those brothers on the block and those brothers who are, the intellectual guys, the intellectual brothers who could study and, they have the privilege of studying Mao, communism, and all.
Yes. Because now, they tell you it's all about the brothers in the block being the revolutionaries, but they can't think. They can't see the overarching picture. Some of them haven't even gone outside their neighborhoods to even know what free trade is. You understand? So in the Haitian Revolution, we had people who were living in France. Baron Tonnerre lived in France. His father was a mulatto. He came back to fight and be Desalin's secretary. He's the one. This is a mulatto, educated African. Okay, he wrote the Haitian Revolution, and he said, "We have suffered so much. We need to write our revolution with the bayonet as pen, the white man's skull as inkwell, and his blood as ink. That is the educated person you want on your side, right? Because he knew who they were and what they were. He didn't have Dessalines' grit in terms of he wasn't a fighter. Like Desalin had to be a fighter. He had to stay alive in the plantation system, right? But he had an education, and he used that education to help Desalin craft his correspondence. If you guys want to look, right, now there's many more information that are out there. Desalin wrote to Jefferson, but they tell you Desalin didn't know, he was illiterate. But after he won the independence, he wrote to Jefferson, he wrote to the British to say, we're not going to out here coming after you. We just want to be free. And for you to recognize our freedom. The United States never recognized Haitians' freedom until 1862, almost 60 years later. Wow. The United States didn't do that. And they want to give you these mythologies that the British and the abolitionists, the white guys, are the ones that got rid of slavery. No, Jean-Jacques Dessalines and the women, children, and men of the Haitian Revolution, and it was a combination of people. It was the skilled, those who knew France, those who spoke French, and those who spoke the languages of the Africans. Like if you that's a skill, right? Like
Yes.
when the Dahomians came into the port of Haiti, one of the first people they saw was the hospitaliers, the nurse, the herbal cure women, right? Because they would bring them to wash off and take out all the scab and infestation and crap so that they can put them on the auction block. And those women would say, I know all the plantations in the north. You know, calm down a little bit. What language do you speak? And go find someone who spoke to help that person understand. What did you do in Africa? These are what did you do and who are you? Who are you related to? And they found they were Dahomian. They might say, okay, if you get into this plantation, once you're assigned whatever, okay, I'm gonna go tell so and so you're coming. So there was a whole underground network that the European knew nothing about, right? Wow. And then you have the Maroons, Grande Brigitte, who is Macanda's wife. She was the one that made the poisons, right? And they would give poisons because they killed you in such horrible manners that sometimes people just wanted to die. And she would give them these packets. They call them macandas. Some of them use it for themselves. Some of them, made sure they used it for their plantation. There was a scare in 1758. And even by 1791, they were scared of the Africans because of their knowledge of poison. Okay. To the point where they would have the cook's grandson or someone valuable to the African taste their food. You understand? So this is psychological warfare. So the Haitian Revolution was not just a military success. It was psychological warfare. It was religious warfare, and it was military warfare. What we were not able to do is the economic part. And we understand that. And we understand that for us to be free, we have to have economic liberation.
Yes. And that's amazing that you mentioned that it wasn't the British, because they, especially in the American history textbooks, Western civilization, American, your typical Western civilization class, they will always point to the abolition movement that began in Britain in the 17, whatever, I forget the exact dates, but, the British movement that began with the cases, Aluda Aquilano, who was one of the famous writers in African, a man who was originally from Africa, but became a famous writer in Britain, speaking about the slave journey and also the journey from Africa on the Atlantic Ocean. He gave his own narrative and account, wrote his own book actually. So they always point to the British or these European forces that wanted to bring about abolition, but really, in fact, if you study history, like you said, it was the Haitian Revolution, which was the firm.
There's nothing like the Haitian Revolution in world history. Like I told you, they had over 1,500 years of Arab enslavement in Africa, in the Mediterranean. And then now you have 300 years of slavery of Western European slavery. So Africans had been fighting all that time. Yes. And Haiti, where they were able to not only win, but to that win translated into the freedom of millions of people on the planet. Millions, right? Because Desalin, for instance, published in the newspaper, and it's out here, you guys can see it, it's on my website, an ad that said this is 1803, 1804, an ad that he had published in all the major newspapers in England, France, and so on, any ship captain who has a cargo of Africans, bring them to Haiti. I will pay you $40 a head. And he did, right? Even Pétion, who ended up killing Desalin, because, you know, they thought that because they were half white, they were superior to the Black Africans. And the European, of course, always pushes that, right, for the mulatto races. The between Jamaica and Haiti is 140 miles in the seaway, right? And they used to, when we won our independence, the Africans that were in Jamaica, you know, all they had to do was get on a boat and land in Haiti, and they were free. And they were always trying to do it, and it was called 140 miles to freedom.
Wow.
So today, of course, you know, if we end up in Jamaica today, they're going to try to deport us. We were the place they were all coming to for freedom. All you had to do was put your foot on this island. This is, if anybody wants to know about Jean-Jacques Dessalines and his great intellectual abilities that no one will tell you, read his 1805 Constitution, because he left it for us. In that 1805 Constitution, he said, we are Black. There is no mulatto in Haiti. There's no white in Haiti. There's only Black. So if you were one of the Polish who actually fought with the Haitian warriors, Haiti made you a citizen and Black. Okay.
Wow.
Because there were Germans, Swiss, and Polish who actually fought with the Africans. He didn't kill them. He only killed the French who were still there, trying to bring back the French. But in those books, they say, you know, he killed all white people. He only killed the French. Because they had all that time. And Rochambeau told Desalin when he came, he was going to beat him like he was dog. He told everybody, when I get my hand on that sort of uppity Negro, I'm going to skin him. When Desalin won at Vertières, that guy had to kneel and ask for passage out of Haiti.
Wow.
Desalin gave him passage, but nobody's going to elevate that.
Wow.
And gave 7,000 Frenchmen passage. Why didn't the rest go? Because they believed they could hoodwink us, because many of us are so naive that they teach you this Abrahamic religion with their picture as God. So a lot of us are programmed like Tousen Ouverture was. Totally programmed to believe that they're civilized.
Yes. Yes.
And to give you an example of what happened, Desalin gave him, you know, even though this man bragged to everybody in the world what he was going to do when he beat Desalin, Desalin let him go. And because Desalin knew that on those waters, he was going to come into connection with some other European tribes, like the British who were fighting the French at the time, he let them have a cannon. As soon as this guy got out of our waters and our reach, he turned that cannon on us again. The British took him. He spent 9 years in British prison. So it happened to Rochambeau. Okay. So anyways, so the Haitian Revolution not only freed the Africans that were there, it also even Pétion, okay, 2 years after our revolution, because the mulatto sons of France, who weren't even at the last battle, they came to bring us into slavery, Boyer and Pétion, right? But Desalines made a deal with them not to fight. Actually, they did not fight in the last battle. They just like stood down, right? But they were in the South, right? And then once we won, you know, you had all these Frenchmen in their heads saying, you know, you're better than this savage. And so Pétion and Boyer conspired to kill Desalin, and they did. And once they did, the last general that was powerful enough, who was the general of the army, was Henri Kristòf. They told Henri Kristòf that they were going to make him the head of the president, and then they took out all of the real power of a president and gave it to like Boyer and Pétion. So the Henri Kristòf went to the north where he's from and created a kingdom. So Haiti was then split into two. So our revolution, 1804, we win. Neo-colonialism starts in October 17th, 1806, when Desalin is murdered by the Mulatto sons of France. And then Boyer and Pétion, the Mulatto sons of France, very Eurocentric. They look down on the people, but they did not make the mistake of Tousen. They let them have their small freehold, right? Pétion let them have their small little freehold where he didn't have big plantations. If he had done that, he probably wouldn't have stayed.
Right.
You understand? And so when I told you that we doing slavery, even like on a Sunday, you got to, like, they didn't feed you, right? But you have a little piece of land where the enslaved people actually made their own food. That's called Jarden, like they call it my little garden, right? That's what they wanted. Just their garden where they could feed themselves and their family, where they can go find all the children that they didn't know what happened to them. That's the life that they wanted. They wanted peace. They wanted to have Lakou, Konbit, work in cooperation with the community. Vive means you have the right to life. Like no one can take your life. That's what this freedom struggle was about. And then cool. Today, that's what we fight for. But what we have is this colonization where they want you to work for an export economy and export everything of value to the motherland, right? Whether it's oil, whatever, that's all they want you to do. And then, or essentially at this point, Haiti is a rich space full of gold and iridium and natural gas. And they just want the land because they have tried one of the ways of stopping the revolution, the Haitian Revolution. Like I said, Boyer we sent soldiers, money, and printing press to help free 5 Latin American countries. We also did the same thing for Ethiopia. We also did the same thing for not soldiers, but we sent money, coffee, and stuff to Greece when Greece declared their independence. So millions of people are independent because of this one tiny island and Jean-Jacques Dessalines and the men and women of the Haitian Revolution. But they would come back, right? The Haitian Revolution, unfortunately, helped America become an empire because defeating the French allowed for Napoleon, because he was still rampaging in Europe, and he had he had lost his army, and he had left something like 20,000 troops in New Orleans. He had every intention of attacking the States and bringing in his Louisiana Purchase, which is right in the middle of the United States. But when we won, surprisingly and shockingly to the greatest general of the European powers, he sold the Louisiana territory to Jefferson for 15 million gold francs. Okay? When he sold that later on, and that doubled the states. There was only 13 states at that time and some territories, but that doubled the Louisiana Purchase, doubled in whole or in part. It made 15 new states.
Wow.
Right.
Wow. So that it like directly led to the expansion. Yes.
It led to what America is. And there's all other ways, right? Because we have gold that they stole from us. that helped them with the Spanish-American War with Girard. But essentially, the French, okay, so the Spanish actually came back on our east side, and then the Europeans would later come back, but about 100 years, like 1915. By that time, America has become the power, because not only did we, unfortunately, accidentally, the French lost their territory, right? And when they lost their territory, what did that do? That doubled slavery in America.
Yeah, yes, right. It's exactly true.
You understand?
And it's interesting, you know, because after the assassination of Desalines, we get the rise of Henri Kristòf, who it appears he becomes a king. He becomes king, sets up the kingdom of Haiti. At least CLR James mentions him as someone who really favored European society. You know, sets up a kingdom in the manner of, you know, the French.
No, he didn't like the French, but he definitely liked the English.
Okay.
And if those of you who want to know, he had a vision for Haiti. He built many edifices of power, but that's because he was looking at the Europeans. Like the people were more important to the Maroons and to the Haitian mindset than these edifices of power. So he built these edifices of power that, as soon as he was dead, were ransacked and stand today as like ruins.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But he was a great, like, you know, general, and he did that. But like I said, if you guys want to look at Clarkson, they call him what's that word that you were using before? A white man that supposedly what's that word?
Oh, abolition.
Abolitionists. Yeah. So there's correspondence between Henri Kristòf and Clarkson. You guys can just look it up. So his empire lasted from 1807 to like 1820. Pretty decent amount of time. And I want to tell you something that you won't read about him, but he sent for Dahomean warriors to come to Haiti and be the policemen for his kingdom.
Wow.
Women warriors. They were called the Dahomettes.
Wow.
So he was definitely influenced by, you know, the heritage of Tousen, being a Dahomean prince. He was influenced by Tantoya, the Dahomean warrior, who was a military strategist. And if you study they call them the wife of the lepers, right? These women didn't get married until they finished their military service. And if you study their story, you will see that the French go to Africa to beat them, because the French knew they beat them in Haiti. If you watch Woman King, right? Haiti was already free. If you watch the movie, right? The European picks their timeline, right? They make as if, you know, when they do I don't know if you remember the Woman King. I don't know if you saw that. Did you see that?
I didn't see it, actually. I didn't see that.
Well, it's dated 1825. He gets his independence in 1804, right? So the Woman King is about the Dahomean Amazon warriors. And that's 1825. And in that, they essentially told you the story of Africans enslaving Africans. You see, they didn't tell you about the Africans and the Dahomeans who had beat the French. What the Woman King tells you is that the Dahomeans were enslavers, and it was the British that was trying to get them to stop the slave trade. They didn't tell you that the reason that the British stopped the damn slave trade is because we beat their butts in the Caribbean in Haiti when they were trying to re-enslave us and take advantage of the geopolitics of their wars with each other. But
Mm-hmm.
so they will tell you a story that has nothing to do with our story. Same thing with Black Panther, right? They're
Mm.
telling you the story of Africans having the most technologically advanced metal. I can't remember. Sometimes I mix it up with Avatar. I think it's unobtainium or vibranium, one of them.
Vibranium. Yeah.
Vibranium. Okay. All right. We have iridium, right? They
Mm.
used that to go out of space. And it was 66
Wow.
billion years ago. If you watch that movie, that's how they
Mm.
start Black Panther, right? 66
Mm.
million years ago, a meteor hit the earth, and then that
Mm.
gave them that power, right? Well, they all know what's in Haiti, and it's
Mm.
also in South Africa, and it's in other places. If you see that map, that's on my website, but the
Mm.
purest form of it is in the mountains of Haiti. That's why the United States built its largest embassy in the Western Hemisphere in Haiti, and the fourth largest embassy in the world in Haiti. But it tells you
Mm.
we have nothing. But it's a naval base because of this fight between the European tribes are still fighting. Now it's, the Eurasian tribes, right? Russia is
Mm.
in the waters of the Caribbean with Cuba and Venezuela.
Mm.
And we are that half circle that, that keeps them there and keeps the power there. So essentially the Haitian Revolution continues. I lead the Free Haiti movement. I bring the template, not of the mulattoes, not even of the generals who were trying to bring the Haitians back into sharecropping,
Mm.
right? But of the Maroons and the actual people that fought. We started at 500,000 people. By the end of the 1804, half of population had died fighting for freedom. We
Wow.
elevate that population. They were mostly all Africans.
Mm-hmm.
We elevate and the mulattoes who fought the Haitian Revolution, like Bois-Tonnerre, like Marie-Jeanne, in order to give all of us this template that is left in Desalin's Constitution of 1805. He says Black. When he won his independence, he could have called that island anything, but he wanted to lift up the spirits of the Incas, the Mayans, the Olmecs. He said Black are warriors.
Mm.
Blacks are lovers of liberty. So there was a definition of what Black was. He turned that on its head in that Constitution. He says,
Mm.
even white people, Caucasian people, if they act like human beings and fight for freedom, they will get that designation of
Wow.
Black. So
Wow.
the Polish became Black. The
Mm.
Germans, those who fought Napoleon with the African warriors, they were citizens and they were Black. And
Mm.
Haiti is a place where he writes in that Constitution. At that time, everywhere around us was enslavement. So he writes in that Constitution, if you set your foot here and you're white, you will be given asylum. You can't have citizenship because it's too small. Like you can't have like property. He
Mm.
said, nowhere in this place can a white man be owner or landowner, right?
Yes.
It wasn't until 1915, during the First World War, when FDR came to Haiti, that he changed our Constitution and changed that so that white people can have our lands.
Mm.
And it was rewritten in Washington by Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR. You see? So, and then they literally tried, the United States came back in like 100 years later. But between that time, between 1825 and 1945, we were paying the French an independence debt. And they realized it was better to use debt to maintain slavery than to actually do slavery. And we were the
Yes.
model for that, because they no longer had to feed us. They no longer had to have security for us. All they had to do is say, in order to have your freedom, you got to give us And to give you the scale of how much money we had to pay for France to recognize us as free people. Remember I told you about the Louisiana Purchase? It was all that territory that made 15 states in whole or in part and quadrupled the size of the United States. Literally, they paid $15 million for it. They paid 10 times, we had to pay 10 times that amount. Haiti, a place that's smaller than the smallest state, smaller than Rhode Island.
Yes.
It took us 122 years to pay that.
And we still see a lot of that legacy today, especially through the, institutions like the World Bank and IMF, indebting countries such as Jamaica, many African countries. So
that's what they use is debt.
Yes.
Like they don't use chattel slavery anymore, and Haiti was the template for that. They use debt, right?
Yes.
And when in 2004, during the bicentennial, the 200th year of our anniversary, the first democratically elected president, the president that I went to Haiti to represent, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, asked France to return the independence debt. They came back with the coup d'etat that took him out and deported him to Africa.
Wow. And so, and I want to,
we have an occupation with the core group of ambassadors from those countries that we beat back in 1804. The French, the British comes in, not as British, they come in as Canada. And then you have Spain, the core group. They're the ones running Haiti right now. So that is against the Viennese Convention, where you have diplomats coming in and working as one against a tiny nation. But the core group is 6 nations plus 3 of their Bretton Woods organizations, kind of. All right. So the 3 organizations encompass or takes into account all of the world bodies, the UN, the OAS, and the European Union. They have a representative in Haiti that's part of the core group of ambassadors running Haiti right now. And then you have the 6 nations. There's Spain. Yes. You know how we started with Spain on the island. France, Canada, and then they had to use Brazil because Brazil is the second economic power in the Americas. And Brazil has the most violence, right? I think it's 54 over 100,000. Why? Because they have the largest population of Blacks and they need to keep them down. And they know how to do that with their favelas. The United States essentially brought those mercenaries into Haiti during the bicentennial to run their occupation. But then when Lula got a little greedy and wanted to use us as labor, the European didn't want that. And then, they got rid of Lula and brought in Bill Clinton. But now Lula, who they literally almost put in prison, is back in power. And the geopolitical position of the Eurasians is different now, right? Because the United States is losing some of its power in the Western Hemisphere. So recently, as you see, when Bolsonaro tried to take over Lula, the United States is like, nah, we're here for you, because they definitely do not want Brazil to do the BRICS.
Yeah.
I mean, they are in the BRICS, but they need to keep them in a position where they're not going to try to essentially go to war or be with Russia to the point of staying away from American interests. And American interests in the Western Hemisphere is what they are thinking about. So the same paradigms that existed during the time of Tousen Louverture exists today in Haiti. We are alone. We don't have a Eurasian power, and we have to do this revolution in a different way.
Yes, that's excellent. And I think that explains, like you were mentioning, the recent coup that happened in Haiti. And so I wanted to just ask this I think I'll ask this question, and that could be our last question
Thank you.
for this discussion. But what is the legacy of the Haitian Revolution for the African diaspora today?
Freedom, dignity, manhood, womanhood. That's the legacy. Without the Haitian Revolution, there may not have been a civil war that helped get rid of slavery in America. Without the Haitian Revolution, because there's so many, now they have changed it, okay? So in America, they use the prison industrial complex system but before that, they were using sharecropping, right? Remember, that's what Tousen was trying to do? So they took all of that, right? And that's what they did. A lot, if you look at Juneteenth, some nations, some states didn't even know they were free. They were still in the plantation. And then they made laws to keep them on the plantation as sharecroppers, right? So the European sort of morphs itself back into the same system where we just become their laboring force. And now they don't need us as their laboring force because of technology. So they put you in the military industrial complex and privatize that so that they can make money, because that's their whole thing, profit over people. So what is the Haitian Revolution? What does it give us as a legacy? It tells you that a woman named Victoria Montu, or her African name was Abdarayatoya, looked at 300 years of enslavement and looked at what she had suffered in Africa and created the children that would do the revolution. The two greatest generals, Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Henri Kristòf, were taken out of slavery by free Black men. Jean-Jacques Dessalines took the name of Jean-Baptiste Desalin, who bought him out of slavery. The other general, same. So that's the revolution. If we want to change the world, we have to change the education of the children that we're building to make them warriors, so that they can fight. Because the ones now that are being trained by the television, programmed by the Abrahamic religions, programmed by these the comfort or their work, are never going to be revolutionaries. So these Haitian warriors looked at the situation and they created those two generals. And those two generals gave us what we have for the last 200 years. We're still holding on. I'm still fighting. Like Èzili Dantò lives, even though they have all kinds of parameters for women, but women were warriors as well as wives and mothers and fighters, right? Nurturers and healers. So that's the Haitian Revolution, shows you how a revolution is done. It's not done just by fighters. It's done by intellectuals. It's done by those who have a larger picture right now, who knows geopolitics, who can see Russia in the waters between Venezuela and Cuba and where Haiti is, who can see that they only use dictatorships in Africa and in everywhere. The United States only creates dictatorships. They call it free elections. But in Haiti, if the right person, if their candidate don't win, they're going to destroy that person like they did Aristide. They want a Kagame, they want a Mobutu. But if you're going to be a Jean-Jacques Dessalines, you're going to say, I'm going to be an independent Black nation, and I want the assets of, that's what Desalin said, I want the assets of my country to be used to negotiate for economic liberation. They kill you because they think your asset is theirs.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so those are the lessons of the Haitian Revolution. When you saw those Haitians under that bridge a year ago in Texas, right? Del Rio Bridge. If you were studying Èzili Dantò's work and you were one of those Haitians, you would have known that Texas, before it was Texas and it belonged to Mexico, we Haitians fought for the independence of Mexico from Spain.
Wow.
And if you know that, then you're not going to just crumble. You're going to keep fighting because you know that under that bridge there was a Black man that fought to get rid of the Spanish.
Mm.
And a Mexican general went to Haiti and asked for help to free themselves from the Spanish. Same thing happened in many other nations, and we helped them. But that story is not being told. So that's why I tell our story, because the narrative is what's going to free you. If you know that your people were not servile, that they're warriors and they never stop fighting, and that they're responsible for New Orleans jazz, the second line, American jazz, American music, that you are responsible for culture that's in the world and for human rights. You invented human rights. Then you won't crumble. You understand that you are carnal, but the greater part of you is spirit. Spirit doesn't die. And you have a line going back to the beginning of time and even before 66 million years ago. You are a light being here with a mission. And that mission has to be as sacred as the mission of the women and men of the Haitian Revolution. Thank you for asking me. I appreciate all your questions.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a pleasure. And so do you have any upcoming work? As I mentioned in the introduction, you're a playwright, a poet, you lead the Free Haiti movement. Is there any upcoming projects or anything that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, I would like to tell, to folks, because we are shadow banned. So I always take whatever I have in terms of these interviews and I'll put them on my channel. So it'd be nice for you guys to continue to take this information someplace, right? That's very important. I have the hashtag Free Haiti, as you see here. If you start using it, then maybe some Haitians who are integrated Negroes would realize that we're not free. Some people think we are free and we need invasion force, that the greatest problem of Haiti are gangs. The greatest problem of American Black ghettos are gangs, not the system of white supremacy. So I do 6 teach-ins a year. It would be great to get all of you to come in doing those 6 teach-ins. Where I go through Boakaima, I go through the last battle, and then right now we're really doing the women from the Congo, the Dahomian women, only because now the international narrative is that Africans enslaved Africans. And we need to bring up IAT as that sterling space where we freed Africans and white folks. We are the land of the brave and the free. So I ask everyone, if you would like to help us, use that hashtag. Help elevate our voice. Look at the template of the Haitian Revolution. And most of all, we have to live. Even though we have to struggle for changing the system, I want every African, every woman and man or children You have to live. It's only in the action of living a life of integrity, but also a life of happiness, that you can help those who don't have any of that. So if you can hear my voice, you probably have a little bit more than those who are in prison, those who are on the high seas dying right now. Cherish that freedom and use it to bring more freedom. Do what the Haitian women like Gantoya did. Find one child who needs help. And that child could be the general that becomes Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Help one. That's what I would say.
That's an amazing message. I'm going to share all of your content in the video description. So guys, please check out Ms. Èzili Dantò's website. Check out all the links that I put in the description. Ms. Èzili Dantò, thank you so much for joining the show. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you.